Lucian Bloodmoon had a witness folded over the oak table, not from pain, from the weight of his own lies collapsing in his chest, and she could hear the exact second his breathing lost its rhythm. The chamber was built for control: stone walls, narrow windows, 2 court scribes at her left, 2 sworn witnesses at her right. Every word copied and sealed because crown law barred interrogators from laying a hand on noble blood. She never needed to touch anyone. She read fear the way other people read weather. The man had come in swearing loyalty to the throne and left his pulse all over the room. He said he had never met the smuggler named in the treason report, yet his right hand kept drifting toward the sleeve seam where traitors hid coded slips. Lucian let silence stretch until the 2 witnesses shifted their feet, until the scribes looked up, until his panic needed somewhere to go. She placed a wax-sealed ledger between them, tapped the date, and spoke without raising her voice. You met him at the river gate on the 3rd frost. You called him cousin to avoid the toll writ. You sold him grain roots. Say it cleanly, and the court will hear cooperation. He stared at her as if she had reached into his skull. She had not. She had spent 9 years learning where people leaked themselves. His mouth opened. I did. I met him. I never thought it would reach the border caravans. I only needed coin. The chamber door opened before the confession seal cooled. King Fenris Wildfire entered with Captain Ivor Reed half a step behind him, and every guard in the corridor straightened like strings pulled tight. Fenris was 33, broad-shouldered, winter-eyed, carrying that controlled stillness that made men revise their sentences before they spoke them. Lucian did not bow right away. She finished the final line in the log, pressed her signet into wax, and only then faced him. Fenris looked at the witness once, dismissed him to the scribes with 2 fingers, and turned his attention to Lucian as if everyone else had thinned into air. His voice stayed low enough that only she heard it. What do you want, Lucian? She had been trained for denials, confessions, perjury loops, oath collapses, and grief spikes. No one had trained her for desire. The question entered her like a blade she could not map. She knew what suspects wanted, what counselors wanted, what enemies wanted. She did not have language for her own hunger. Safety sounded childish. Belonging sounded weak. Being seen sounded fatal. She gave the only answer her training allowed. My king, I want to serve the truth. His gaze held her for one long breath, and she watched something nearly human move across his face before he locked it away. Serve it well, he said, and walked out. The witness confession made her reputation sharper by nightfall. Fenris's question made her sleep impossible. To understand why one sentence from him cracked a woman who had never cracked in court, it had to return to the year 1413, to a courtyard where a 14-year-old girl learned what it meant to be judged in public and found unwanted. After Lucian's parents died that winter, the birth pack elders called the reclaiming circle at dusk. 12 clan fires lit around a stone ring while surviving kin stated who would take an orphaned wolf into their household. She stood at the center with ash on her wrists, and hope she did not trust herself to name. Her father's brother looked away first. Her mother's cousins followed. The alpha of her birth pack announced winter stores were too thin, and blood ties did not obligate shelter without political advantage. The words landed cleanly, as if fairness lived inside cruelty. No one stepped forward. The rejection was legal, witnessed, and final. It was also public, and public wounds did not heal privately. She learned that night to keep her face still while people measured her usefulness out loud. Magistrate Soren Vale, her mother's older brother, arrived from the capital after the circle ended. He wrapped his cloak around her shoulders and told her she would not freeze in that yard, though his voice carried less comfort than calculation. Come with me, he said. If they will not keep you as kin, I will make them fear you as law. Soren brought her to the royal court in 1414, placed her in the junior records wing, and began a training regime that shaped her bones as much as her mind. He taught interrogation protocols, micro-expressions, oath structures, and emotional suppression so strict she learned to lower her pulse on command. He taught her where to stand to force eye contact, how to make silence feel longer than pain, how to speak 3 words and let someone else destroy themselves filling the space. By 1422, after 9 years under him, she could pull truth from men who came in rehearsed for war. She also could not answer a simple question about what she wanted. Her title at 25 was Royal Interrogator, and the court called her efficient with a tone that was half praise and half warning. She wore dark uniforms with no family crest, carried a slim knife she never drew, and signed each admissible statement beside 2 witnesses because Crown law refused confessions gathered outside that structure. Nobles could not be tortured under Crown authority, and the law mattered to her because law was the only structure that had ever stood still when people did not. Each sealed log entered the chain of custody vault before midnight. Any break in custody could overturn convictions. Lucian knew this system like prayer. The throne above that legal machinery had changed hands amid blood. In winter 1423, Fenris Wildfire had consolidated rule after a border ambush left 38 dead, including scouts who had ridden with him since he was not yet king. The root leak came from inside his private circle, from a former mate who traded troop movement for leverage in a succession bid. Fenris survived, his trust did not. He entered 1424 as a king who held his court like a fortress, courteous, precise, and nearly unreachable. Counselors called him stable, enemies called him cold. Lucian read something else in him, a man who had welded armor over grief and left no seam exposed. The first time she entered his gravity before the cold open was at a policy hearing on false grain weights. He listened to 6 petitions without interruption, then asked one question that forced all 6 liars into contradiction. Lucian watched from the record's tier and recognized technique she used herself. Pressure through clarity, fear through stillness. She felt respect she did not permit herself to feel for rulers. That respect became dangerous in spring 1424, when his one private question followed her into every room. "What do you want, Lucian?" She told herself he had tested her discipline. She told herself kings questioned tools the way blacksmiths tapped blades. She told herself his attention meant scrutiny, not interest. Those readings fit her wound, and wounds often felt like reason. Captain Ivor Reed disrupted that comfort 3 days later when he arrived at her office before dawn with 4 guards and an order bearing the king's seal. "From this morning onward," Ivor said, voice careful, "your testimony logs are moved under direct guard." Lucian frowned. "Interrogation records already have guard access." "Now they have mine," he replied. By midday, the reason surfaced. A confession from Baron Tamsin Rook appeared in council records with Lucian's signet attached, claiming she had coerced him into a treason admission in private with no witnesses. The log looked authentic at first glance. Seal, signature, filing ribbon. 2 lines gave it away, her title written in a hand that copied shape without rhythm, and a custody mark stamped in black wax instead of red. The chamber erupted anyway because forged scandal worked even when clumsy. Lady Naira Ashven sat on the council bench with concern painted on her face and asked whether the Crown's interrogation arm had become ungovernable. Naira wore concern the way actresses wore jewelry. Fenris ended the hearing in 6 minutes. He did not defend Lucian with warmth, which would have looked personal. He defended process with surgical force. He ordered a custody audit, suspended all convictions tied to disputed logs, and transferred archive oversight to Captain Reed pending review. Lucian expected anger for the disruption. Fenris gave her a direct instruction as the chamber emptied. "From now on, you do not work alone." She heard accusation in the order and nodded once. That night he stationed 2 wolves outside her quarters. She interpreted protection as confinement. The audience watching her would have recognized the gap sooner than she did. The first framing attempt should have ended as legal theater. It escalated because someone needed her discredited fast. 3 days after the forged Rook confession, a clerk who handled intake records collapsed on the archive stairs with a puncture wound under his jaw. He lived long enough to whisper one name, Lucian. The accusation made no sense, and sense had stopped mattering. Ivor found the real clue in her office, an ink vial on her desk laced with blackroot venom. One drop in tea would have stopped her heart in minutes. The first assassination attempt failed because she worked late in the chamber and never drank what was left in her cup. Fenris arrived at her office while healers carried the clerk away. He scanned the room once, saw the vial in Ivor's gloved hand, and his restraint narrowed to something that looked like controlled violence. His next orders rolled out cleanly: triple guard rotation, food taster protocol, no unscreened documents touching her desk. Lucian absorbed the list and braced for reprimand. "You think this is about your mistakes," he said, voice low enough for only her and Ivor. "Someone is trying to erase you from my court." He left before she could form a reply. She stood in the doorway after he was gone, pulse climbing for reasons that had nothing to do with poison. Her misreading deepened because that was what old injuries did under pressure. She told herself his reaction came from institutional risk, not from her. A royal interrogator murdered in office would signal weakness. Kings managed symbols. She was a symbol. That interpretation protected her from hope. Hope looked expensive in courts where alliances were bought with bloodlines. Nira Ashvin embodied that arithmetic. She sat at Fenris's right in strategy councils, represented a mountain territory controlling winter grain passes, and had once been discussed as treaty bride material before Fenris postponed all marriage negotiations after the 1423 ambush. Her smile toward Lucian stayed polite and cool, the smile of someone measuring whether a tool could be repurposed or discarded. Soren Vale used different tactics. He was her mentor, magistrate, and uncle by blood, which gave him access where others saw walls. He visited her office with concern when the poison incident spread, closed the door, and offered tea she did not touch. "You owe your place to discipline," he said. "The king's attention can blur discipline. Keep your answers legal. Keep your face empty." Lucian met his eyes. "You think I am compromised? I think you were rejected once because no one saw your value. Do not mistake being watched for being valued now." His words slid into the oldest crack in her chest and sat there like a hook. The second framing attempt struck a week later during hearings on river tax fraud. A transcript surfaced in the morning docket alleging Lucian had threatened a minor council heir to force testimony, with 2 witness signatures and a custody ribbon that appeared correct. She spotted the alteration faster this time, fibers scraped under the ink where original lines had been lifted and replaced. The forged transcript implicated her in unlawful coercion. Fenris read it in open court, closed the file, and canceled the afternoon proceedings. He escorted Lucian out himself through a side corridor while 12 council seats hummed with whispers. His hand touched her elbow once to guide her around a bottleneck, and the contact burned through fabric like a confession she refused to hear. "Do you trust your uncle?" he asked without looking at her. The question hit harder than the first one because she did not know the answer fast enough. "I trust his training." Fenris nodded once, unreadable. Training can be used to protect truth, or to manufacture it. She turned to challenge him, found him already gone toward the war room. That evening, she made a decision that resolved one obstacle and opened 3 more. She went to the chain of custody vault after curfew with Captain Reed and requested a full manual audit of her case files. Ivor hesitated because entering sealed vault tiers without magistrate approval could end his command. Lucian signed a liability writ transferring legal exposure to herself. If she wanted to stop being managed by events, she needed evidence with teeth. The audit lasted 6 hours. They began with disputed transcripts and expanded to all logs Lucian had filed in the past year. On shelf row 11, Ivor found a ledger box, whose wax ring had been reheated and reset. Inside lay 17 confession logs altered at different points. Some softened to acquit men tied to Naira's trade faction, some hardened to criminalize Fenris loyalists. Every altered record carried proper witness names copied from originals and custody marks replicated with skilled dyes. Whoever did it understood court procedure from the inside. Lucian's training turned the room cold. She knew exactly how this operation had been built. She took one altered log to her desk lamp and saw the final signature stroke she had watched all through adolescence, Soren's habit of pressing too hard at the tail of a V, invisible to casual review and obvious to anyone who had copied his exercises for years. Lucian did not cry. Shock did not arrive as tears for her. It arrived as clarity that made her hands steadier. Soren had trained her to detect fear and forgery. Soren had used the same craft to bend convictions toward a political end. Naira's name surfaced on attached motion slips recommending emergency treaty stabilization if court credibility collapsed. The trap, finally, had shape. They moved to secure the evidence before dawn. Ivor took 9 logs to military lockup under his personal chain seal. Lucian kept 8 in a courier satchel hidden beneath floorboards in her old archive room, where only junior clerks knew the loose stone. She chose split custody because 1 cache could be seized, 2 required coordination conspirators no longer possessed. Her caution saved her life before sunrise. On the way to a closed hearing, her carriage axle snapped on the east bridge where railings were low and river stones waited below. The driver shouted once before the wheel sheared. Lucian kicked the carriage door open and jumped, rolled into sleet, and felt a hand seize the back of her collar and haul her clear as the carriage splintered against the bridge post. Fenris had been riding behind on an unscheduled route check. The second assassination attempt failed because timing betrayed the killers. Fenris's route shifted that morning after an unrelated scout report, and chance ruined a plan built on routine. Lucian sat on wet stone coughing river mist while guards flooded the bridge. Fenris crouched in front of her, gloves dark with grime, eyes stripped of court distance. "Were you hurt?" he asked. "Only bruised." He exhaled once, harsh, and she saw the mask crack in plain sight. Fear, real fear, crossed his face before discipline reclaimed it. He stood, ordered 6 arrests tied to carriage maintenance, and looked down at her again. "No more assumptions," he said. "You stay where I can reach you." Lucian moved into a secured chamber near the king's strategy rooms under protest she voiced, and he ignored. She slept poorly with wolves outside her door, and maps inside the room showing border pressure she had never been meant to see. Fenris visited once each night to review case progress. He spoke in concise directives, asked precise questions, and left before midnight. On the 4th night, she found him staring at a memorial slate listing the 38 dead from the 1423 ambush, names carved in narrow lines worn by touch. He did not hear her enter. "I told myself I could build a throne without trust," he said, voice roughened by memory. "I was wrong once, and men paid for it." He turned, saw her expression, and the wall came back up. "Get some rest, Interrogator." That brief admission changed her internal map even while she tried to deny the shift. His distance was not contempt. It was a survival strategy formed by betrayal measured in bodies, and she finally understood the shape of the wound his former mate had left behind. She carried her own version of that strategy from the reclaiming circle in 1413, where Worth had been voted on and refused. The recognition unsettled her because empathy made attachment possible, and attachment had always been where loss entered. The next day forced her from introspection into action. Soren summoned her to a private magistrate review with 1 witness present, legal on paper, coercive in spirit. He placed a sealed statement before her, alleging minor custody irregularities in the 17 logs, enough to dilute their value if she signed. "You are overextended," he said softly, Sign this correction and the king keeps his stability. Refuse, and your career ends beside mine. He leaned closer, voice turning intimate and cold. I pulled you out of that 1413 courtyard. I trained you for 9 years. Everything you are in this court came through me. You owe me silence. He called it mentorship debt, and he used that debt as blackmail. Lucian left without signing, which made an immediate consequence unavoidable. Soren filed a procedural complaint suspending her active interrogations until review. Losing her post cut at the core identity he had built in her, and he knew it. She spent 2 days confined to records work while rumors spread that the king had sidelined his own interrogator to calm treaty partners. Naira used those rumors to push her next move. She requested a harvest court hearing before the 12 seats to activate a treaty marriage clause with Ashfen, framing it as necessary to restore public trust and secure grain routes before winter. She spent the same week trying to lock votes with promises of escorted caravans and border riders once her alliance took the throne. If Fenris accepted, Naira became queen by charter. Lucian became expendable evidence. Lucian refused passive exile. She tracked one remaining unverified witness tied to altered logs, a junior archivist named Mara Ellen, who had disappeared from duty. Ivor objected to the search because Lucian remained under review and killers had already taken 2 shots at her life. She went anyway with 2 trusted guards and found Mara in a River District chapel, bruised, terrified, and carrying a satchel of original index cards, proving custody substitution orders came from Soren's office through Naira's aides. Men followed them out of the chapel with drawn knives and no insignia. Lucian had one clear choice: run alone and survive, or stay with the witness and risk both. She stayed. She pushed Mara through a side gate toward waiting guards and turned to block the alley mouth with a fallen cart, buying seconds with splintered wood and sheer refusal. One attacker slashed her forearm, another went down under Ivor's tackle as reinforcements arrived. Lucian nearly blacked out from blood loss before she saw Fenris at the alley entrance, having ridden hard after an alert runner found him mid-briefing. His reaction to seeing her hurt was immediate and disproportionate to formal protocol. He crossed the distance in 3 strides, pressed his hand over the wound, and ordered healers with a voice that made armed men move like conscripts under fire. He did not ask about optics. He asked if she had kept the witness alive. Yes, she said through clenched teeth. Mara has the index cards. His eyes held hers. Good. Fenris remained beside her bed in the healer wing until dawn, a fact he tried to erase by giving clipped legal updates when she woke. She noticed fatigue under his eyes, and the torn cuff where Allystone had shredded his sleeve. I am under suspension, she said. You should not be seen here. I am king, he answered. I decide where I am seen. His jaw tightened, and for one unguarded moment his voice dropped to the register she had heard by the memorial slate. I cannot lose another person because I hesitated. He stood immediately after speaking, as if distance could pull the words back. Lucian watched him leave and understood her misread had become impossible to maintain with honesty. The political ground shifted faster than her heart could process. Mara's index cards validated the 17 altered logs, linked substitution orders to Soren's office, and showed payment transfers from Ashven brokers to shell accounts controlled by Nira's household steward. Ivor's arrests from the bridge attempt produced matching testimony under oath. Chain of custody held. Convictions tied to false logs began collapsing, which triggered panic among families who had profited from those convictions. 2 houses that had signaled support for Naira's alliance bid withdrew pending review, and her promised majority fractured in public. Naira advanced the harvest hearing date to contain damage before the rest of her block peeled away. Soren requested private audience with Lucian one last time before formal charges. She accepted because unfinished loyalties carried their own gravity. He met her in the old training chamber where he had drilled emotion out of her as a teenager. The room still smelled of wax and stone dust. Soren stood with hands clasped behind his back, less uncle now than architect defending design. "I made you into the court's finest instrument," he said. "Without me, you were a discarded pup from 1413. I gave you law, rank, purpose. Do not destroy what I built over one king's attention." Lucian felt grief rise before anger because part of her had loved him, feared him, and wanted his approval long after she stopped needing it. "You built me to serve truth," she replied. "You use truth as a leash." His face hardened. "Truth belongs to rulers who can bear its cost." She shook her head. "Truth belongs to those willing to pay it." Leaving that room resolved the central hesitation she had carried since finding his signature stroke on forged logs. She had been unable to testify while still trying to preserve him as family. After this confrontation, she could name him accurately and proceed. The obstacle was no longer uncertainty. It was pain, and pain she could survive. Harvest Court convened at sundown in the high chamber. 12 carved seats filled, banners lowered for neutrality, every major house present because succession, treaty, and legal legitimacy now sat in one hearing. Nira wore silver mourning silk for public trust in crisis, and requested the throne enforce the Ashvin marriage clause to stabilize food routes and military support. Clause text allowed override only by emergency throne prerogative in wartime conditions, a tool kings used rarely because it burned alliances. Lucian stood at the witness rail in formal black, wound bandaged beneath sleeve, evidence satchel at her feet. She expected Fenris to choose kingdom arithmetic over her, and expecting it hurt less than hoping otherwise. Her 1413 wound whispered old rules. People keep what serves them. The rejected do not become central by luck. She recited those rules while Nyra spoke of duty and optics and the need for a politically clean queen. Fenris listened without expression until Nyra finished, and Soren requested leniency on grounds that procedural manipulation had prevented wider civil collapse. The chamber leaned toward compromise. Lucian felt the apparent impossibility seal shut around her. She had come prepared to testify and walk away alone. Fenris rose. The room quieted with the speed of instinct. He held the treaty charter in one hand, read the relevant clause aloud, and invoked emergency throne prerogative under wartime override, citing active internal sabotage, attempted murders tied to treaty coercion, and cross-border manipulation of legal records as ongoing war conditions. The legal language landed like hammer strikes. Ashvin delegates objected immediately, warning withdrawal of grain contracts and border riders before first snow. Fenris accepted the cost in open session. That was his costly choice, explicit, public, irreversible, and he made it while carrying the exact fear his former mate had carved into him in 1423. He turned toward the 12 seats. "I will not secure my throne by rewarding treachery with a marriage." Nira stepped forward with a final gambit, voice sharpened. "Your refusal destabilizes the realm for an interrogator with no lineage claim." Fenris's gaze moved to Lucian, and for the first time all night, he let the court witness what he had hidden for months: protection without calculation, recognition without apology. "I choose her because she held to truth when truth cost her rank, blood, and kin," he said. "I choose her because she was targeted precisely because she could not be bought. I choose her because she is my mate, and tonight I claim what should never have been vulnerable in this court." He crossed the chamber, stopped before Lucian, and offered his hand. "Lucian Bloodmoon, stand with me." In that critical moment, the narrative widened for a breath into him, because his decision carried the weight of King and Alpha at once. Fenris felt the old fear from 1423 rise, the memory of trust weaponized and 38 names carved in stone. He felt it, accepted it, and chose through it. Claiming Lucian in public gave enemies a target, exposed his center, and reopened the exact vulnerability betrayal had taught him to hide. He made the choice anyway, because leaving her unclaimed in that room would have violated something deeper than policy. Back in Lucian's perspective, his hand remained extended and steady. The spring question hit her again with no shelter left inside it. "What do you want, Lucian?" And now an answer required action in front of the realm. She saw every consequence at once: political retaliation, social hostility, possible border hunger, and the chance she could again be abandoned if pressure broke them. Choice still belonged to her, and this was where she made it reciprocal. She took his hand. "I stand with you, and I choose you," she said, voice carrying to all 12 seats. The claim ritual required no theatrics in that chamber, only oath and public witness. Fenris touched his forehead to hers once, brief and reverent, while scribes recorded the declaration in royal register. Gasps and whispers moved through the hall like weather turning. Nira's expression fractured for the first time. Soren looked at Lucian as if seeing the cost of misjudging her finally arrive. The hearing did not end with romance. It moved straight into legal consequence, because love in their world meant nothing without action under oath. Lucian released Fenris's hand, stepped to the witness rail, and requested formal testimony against Magistrate Soren Vale and Lady Nira Ashven for conspiracy, evidence tampering, coercion of sworn statements, and complicity in 2 assassination attempts on a crown officer. Her voice shook once on Soren's name and steadied before the sentence ended. This was her costly choice, and it matched his in weight. It also severed the mentorship debt Soren had used to own her silence. She submitted the 17 altered logs, Mara's index cards, payment trails, and bridge maintenance bribes into record under dual witness. She stated clearly that Soren had leveraged mentorship debt and familial obligation as blackmail, threatening her rank, and fabricated professional ruin unless she buried evidence that protected Nira's alliance bid. The chamber heard not a victim pleading rescue, but a woman choosing truth over the only family that had once chosen her. Council vote followed midnight protocol. 10 of 12 seats supported immediate imprisonment for Soren pending trial and title stripping with exile for Nira under armed escort at dawn. Ashven delegates retained trade talks under emergency terms. No marriage tie, reduced leverage, tense but intact enough to prevent winter famine. Fenris had lost the easy alliance route and accepted a harder one built on renegotiation and military escorts, costly in coin and manpower. Nira's alliance bid collapsed in the same chamber where she had expected coronation language. Soren was led out in irons. He looked back once. Lucian did not. Nira removed her council pin herself before guards took position at her side. Chin high, defeat wrapped in dignity she refused to drop. After the chamber emptied, Fenris found Lucian on a balcony above the inner court, where harvest lanterns burned low and first frost silvered the railings. She stood with both hands on cold stone, body finally shaking now that duty had no more immediate demands. He approached slowly, as if giving her room to decide each second anew. "No one will touch those records again without your authority," he said. "Starting tonight, the Crown establishes a separate office, Royal Truth Keeper. Independent chain of custody oversight, direct access to the throne, protected from magistrate interference. I want you to hold it." She turned, surprised despite everything. "You are asking me to design the rules that can constrain even you." "Yes." "Why?" "Because you would use them." The mate bond in their world could be felt involuntarily and denied politically. Fenris had ended denial in public hours earlier. Lucian still had one personal threshold to cross. Not legal, not ceremonial, emotional. She had been asked what she wanted in spring and could not answer. Night had brought her back to the same question with no place left to hide. He asked again, softer this time. "What do you want, Lucian?" She looked at him, at the man who had chosen her at cost and stayed after victory when strategy could have dismissed tenderness. She looked at herself, at the girl in 1413 told she was not worth keeping, at the woman in 1424 who had testified anyway. She looked at the wound he carried from 1423 and made her answer include him, not as king, as the man who had risked that wound opening again. "I want a life where truth is not a weapon held over me," she said. "I want to build law that outlives fear. I want you beside me when this court hates us for it. I will not weaponize your trust the way it was weaponized before." Fenris stepped closer, not touching until she nodded once. "You will have all three." Their bond settled not as spectacle, as certainty. His thumb traced the edge of her bandaged forearm where Ally Steele had cut skin days earlier, and she watched grief and relief share space in his eyes without either being denied. He did not hide the vulnerability this time. She did not punish him for it. Below them, Captain Ivor Reed organized the night watch with his usual calm efficiency. Still captain, still steady, now posting guards under orders signed jointly by King and Truth Keeper designate. Mara Ellen slept in protected quarters with witness immunity granted. Archive locks were replaced before dawn. Practical details anchored the romance, which was exactly why it held. In the weeks that followed, consequences unfolded with the rhythm of reality rather than fairy tale ease. Ashfen caravans arrived late and under heavy escort while negotiators rebuilt terms without marriage leverage. Fenris spent long nights balancing troop deployment against grain security, his costly choice continuing to cost him in logistics and political capital. Lucian drafted the Royal Truth Keeper Charter with clauses requiring dual witness integrity audits, rotating custody officers, and independent review rights, extending even to the throne's own directives under emergency scrutiny. Fenris signed each clause without dilution. Trust between them grew through these acts more than through declarations. Soren's trial opened before winter close. Lucian testified once, concise, specific, and unflinching. She described training methods, pressure tactics, document manipulations, and the moment mentorship had become control. She repeated under oath that he had invoked rescue and training as debt to blackmail her silence, which became the clearest motive for her public testimony at Harvest Court. She did not exaggerate, and that restraint gave her words force no theatrics could match. Soren accepted partial responsibility in exchange for sentence mitigation and received imprisonment under Crown Seal with no parole clause before 10 years. Nira departed into formal exile at first thaw under guard escort. Stripped of title, estates reassigned to Crown trustees pending border settlement. She did not speak to Lucian when their paths crossed at the gate. Some endings were closure, others were distance. Lucian accepted both. By spring of 1425, 1 year after the interrogation where Fenris first asked the question she could not answer, court behavior around Lucian had changed in visible ways. Counselors who once dismissed her as a technical function now waited when she entered legal review, because chain of custody rulings could halt proceedings regardless of rank. Young clerks requested training under her office, drawn less by status than by the ethics she enforced, accuracy without intimidation. Fenris still spoke in concise declarations in public, yet in private he explained more than ordered, a shift she noticed each time and never took lightly. He had been formed by a world where attachment invited attack. She had been formed by a world where attachment could be withdrawn. They chose each other with full knowledge of both histories. One evening after session close, Lucian returned to the old courtyard, where rejected petitioners lined up for winter placement hearings, the same kind of process that had failed her at 14 in 1413. She had rewritten intake criteria through the Truth Keeper office, so no orphaned claimant could be dismissed without documented alternative shelter and independent review. Procedure would not heal every wound, though it could prevent familiar ones. Fenris found her there watching a young boy receive assignment papers and a warm coat from court stores. "You changed this," he said. "We changed this," she corrected. He smiled, small and real, and the sight still startled her in the best way. Their fulfillment did not erase scars. It integrated them. Lucian still woke some nights from dreams of standing in the reclaiming circle while faces turned away. Fenris still paused at memorial slate names from the 38 dead before major military decisions. Difference lived in what followed those moments. She reached for him when old fear rose. He reached back without hesitation. The court learned the new shape of the throne over time. King and Truthkeeper aligned, bond publicly claimed, authority and accountability braided instead of opposed. Opposition remained, because hierarchy rarely yielded cleanly, yet the axis had shifted enough to hold. The woman once rejected in public now carried public authority that could not be argued away. On the anniversary of the Harvest Court, the 12 seats convened to ratify the full Truthkeeper Charter into permanent law. Vote passed 11-1. Lucian signed as officeholder. Fenris signed as king. Ivor signed as witness commander. Mara signed as citizen archivist representative, handshaking and proud. The record closed with 4 seals and no alterations. When the chamber emptied, Fenris lingered beside Lucian at the dais where 1 year earlier he had claimed her before skeptical eyes. He touched the old scar on her forearm lightly and asked, almost teasing now, "Do you still know what you want?" She met his gaze without flinching. "Yes. This, and the work that keeps it honest." He kissed her in full light of an open hall. No secrecy, no hedging, no retreat. That was the ending her younger self could not have imagined in 1413. Not because a king had saved her, because she had chosen repeatedly under pressure and been chosen in return by someone whose choice reshaped the world around them. Soren's prison sentence held. Nira's exile held. 2 assassination attempts had failed and left evidence chains that held. 17 altered logs became the case study every new archivist read before touching a seal. Lucian Bloodmoon remained the court's most effective interrogator in skill and became something larger in role, royal truthkeeper, mate to Fenris Wildfire, a woman no longer trained away from her own desire. When he asked what she wanted now, she answered without fear, and the answer matched the life they had already begun to build.